Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerdlings of all ages, welcome! I'm JoRoSaR and this is another GosuGamers Hearthstone deck guide. As you can probably gather from the background behind me, today we're going to be talking about an old classic. It's the Tempo Mage. It's a bit of a mid-rangey build really that focuses on board control through value minions and targeted removal. And it was originally called Tempo Mage because of a couple of useful reasons. The first is that it plays really cheap growing minions, so think about your mana worms alongside cheap removal such as Arcane Missiles and Arcane Blast. That was the basically principal idea. And it kind of cheats mana as well to give you as much value as possible through Sorcerer's Apprentice. It also has swing cards now, such as Fireland's Portal, but Flamewaker, I suppose, is the one that everyone will have known or played at some point before, and thus it can develop board control while clearing your opponent's board, netting the tempo advantage. Some modern variations, really, are more value-based, playing on card draw, such as Kabbalist's Tome. And all of the builds are going to be presented here today. In fact, let me go ahead and show you a couple that are on screen now. So you've got three core variations of Tempo Mage here. On the left, you'll see your standard Tempo Mage. It's more balanced, you've got a good mix there of spells and minions, and it's been brought back into the meta by the Chinese Hearthstone community, recently used by LG to great success in the Hearthstone team leagues. In the middle, you have Tome Tempo. It's a bit more spell heavy, this one, and it prioritizes card advantage over tempo itself. It uses Kabbalist's Tome combined with Emperor Thaurissan to basically give you lots and lots of spells. You can have a couple of slight modifications to this deck in the middle. You might want to take out a Fireland's Portal and add in a Ragnaros or JoRoSaR, for example. I'll talk about them a little bit later on. Then on the right, you have your minion/summoner Tempo Mage. So it's a bit more minion heavy, and it focuses on trade-based board control. So it uses durable minions like Water Elemental, and value minions like Faceless Summoner and Drake, etc. to go ahead and establish control that way. So now that you've had a flavor for what the decks look like, let's check out a couple of the core cards. So on your screen, you can see the cards that we would probably recommend are the core to more or less any Tempo Mage matchup. And the core cards do one of two things. One, they establish and maintain early game board presence and control. And two, they fuel a mid-game board damage combo of some description. So Mana Worm and Sorcerer's Apprentice are two of the most important minions in the deck, right? Mana Worm can often be a win condition on its own if your opponent doesn't actually clear it fast enough. And Sorcerer's Apprentice makes the already cheap spells in the deck even cheaper and ideally free. Both cards represent the very fundamentals of tempo. The gem of the deck is arguably Flamewaker, a powerful board clearing tool against minion decks and an efficient burn against control decks as well that basically won't play minions. It synergizes with a lot of the low cost spells in the deck, your Arcane Blast, your Arcane Missiles, your Frost Bolts, etc. I could go on. And it shines in the mid game as well because it tends to clear the board in preparation for the late game. When Flamewaker and Sorcerer's Apprentice are on the board together, dirty things happen. So, moving beyond the absolute core card, let's take a look at some of the other ones that can be seen in this deck. Tempo Mage doesn't lose power in the late game, it's got plenty of tools at its disposal here, and Fireland's Portal is actually a great addition from Karazhan. It fits the philosophy of the deck perfectly. Kill minions while developing minions of your own. Classic tempo. Other mid-range threats include your Azure Drakes, Emperor Thaurissan. Your opponents have to kill them because, otherwise trouble ensues. You have to be really careful when you leave one of those guys on the board. Generally speaking, it's not a good idea. And for the fiery finish, this deck has more tools. Ragnaros, of course, just about bonkers in every mid-range control deck. All sorts of fun and games there. Don't really need to describe that too much more. You then have Archmage Antonidas, and that makes the best of unspent 1 mana spells when you reach the late game and they're not that useful anymore. Presto! All of a sudden you can have a Fireball Bonanza at your fingertips. And then, even though he's been nerfed a little, JoRoSaR can play a big role in Tome Tempo builds, so you still see him hanging around. It's not necessarily a mistake at all, even though he's been nerfed. Check him out, maybe try playing him for a couple of games and let us know what you think. Yogg is definitely still a part of a lot of tempo decks. So let's check out our mulligan strategy and what we plan on doing with these cards. So relatively straightforward to begin. In all builds, getting Mana Worm is your top priority. Consider hard mulliganing for Mana Worm, right? So that's rule number 1. Sorcerer's Apprentice and Arcane Blast are great in the current standard. You know, Arcane Blast kills Buccaneers, nudge nudge, wink wink. So that's going to be pretty useful for you on ladder as well. If you're playing against an aggro deck, you'd probably want to keep your Flamewaker and Frostbolt because you'll most likely be on the control-y side of the matchup, if that makes sense. But if you're facing a weapon class and you're running a mirror image specifically and you have that in your mulligan, consider keeping it, especially against Shaman and Warrior, because it'll keep your Mana Worms and your Sorcerer's Apprentices safe from Fiery War Axes, Spirit Claws, Jade Claws, etc, etc. You'll want to establish dominance in your early game turns. So you need to keep your Mana Worm, your Apprentice, and any cheap removal. That tends to be pretty devastating in the early game and very, very good for you. Keep your Mana Worm alive if possible, and if it sticks around for 2 to 3 turns, generally speaking, your game's already half won. If you've drawn Flamewaker in the early turns, plan ahead. You quite often won't play Flamewaker on turn 3. Instead, try combining him with Missiles or Blast or other removal for immediate value. Mirror Image is great, by the way, for this particular purchase, because it also keeps Mana Worm and Sorcerer's Apprentice alive, and of course you have Taunt that you have to go through, and you've just played cheap/free spells. Happy days. So if you can, and you still have it in your hand, I recommend keeping Mirror Image for that very purpose. Now, at all times, you do need to be aware of your role and your possible win conditions. So let me give you some examples. Versus aggro, for instance, you want to be playing the control game and you want to tire the aggro deck out, so you're not looking to do too much crazy stuff yourself early on. Against control, though, you want to be applying pressure but not to overcommit to massive removals. So the kind of things you might be doing, for instance, could be playing Kabbalist's Tome to generate additional value at the same time as doing something like using Water Elemental to keep weapon classes in check, for instance. That would be a good way of keeping your opponent a little bit subdued. Against Reno decks, becomes a little bit trickier because you don't want to burn too much damage to face. You need to be surgical with how you actually apply that. Don't be baited, for example, into wasting fireballs on someone's face only to have Reno heal everything up. That's gonna suck! So what you do instead is you try baiting Reno yourself, either by playing minion-based game, or maybe, just maybe, expanding enough burn just to keep your opponent anxious. Maybe he or she will consider playing Reno just 1 turn earlier than they otherwise would have done, and then of course you can proceed with your regular game plan. So a word of caution against decks that are very obviously Reno as you start playing them. Just make sure you understand the balance between trying to bait Reno out and then being able to go for their face. Important to do those calculations at the start of your turns. So that just about wraps things up for the Tempo Mage here. I hope you've enjoyed the guide. You can pause the video to check out the deck list as well. They're not on that side, they're on that side. There we go. No worries. I'm JoRoSaR. You can go ahead and find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all that jazz at JoRoSaR. And this is, of course, the GosuGamers Hearthstone channel. If you want more guides like this and you want to check out more great content centered around Hearthstone, click follow on this channel and we'll be bringing you more of that as it comes out. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for your likes and comments, and I'll see you next time. Take care.